everyone, and welcome to the Morning Coffee Podcast. I am your host, Brooke Carlock, and I'm so excited that you are here with me today. Before I actually started anything, I just want to say right now, I don't know when you're listening to this or watching this, but the wildfires are happening in California, and it is such a struggle, I know, for me as a griever watching these people go through all of these horrible events, losing everything that they own and losing people that they love. And I just want to send my love out there and let everyone in California know that we support you and we're thinking about you. On to the podcast. I have been a huge fan of my guest today for a long time. Since I lost my daughter, I was telling her my own therapist actually recommended that I follow her. And I started that years ago and have been a fan ever since. So I am delighted that she is here on the podcast today. Lisa Keefauver, she is a grief activist, grief warrior. She has been through a lot of her own struggles and uses that knowledge to help other people. But she's also a therapist and a social worker herself. So she has that background as well, which I really admire. She's the author of the book, Grief is a Sneaky Bitch, which is fantastic. If you liked my book, you will definitely like hers. It has a lot of the same vibe and some swear words in there too. So we have a lot of the same style, which I love. She's also the host of the podcast, Grief is a Sneaky Bitch. Can't wait to talk to her today about her grief journey and any recommendations she has for others on their grief journey as well. So welcome, Lisa. Hi.
Hi.
Good morning. And thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. So happy to be here. I am in California, though, safe and sound. And because it's early, I didn't even bring my cup of coffee to our morning coffee. What was I thinking? I just didn't quite get that ready. That's okay. That's all right.
Okay. If you would have coffee, what would you be drinking?
Home, I just do a simple pour over because I just can't invest in the fancy machinery yet. But if I go out, my favorite is a cappuccino with almond milk and a little cinnamon.
Oh,
that's my drink of choice.
Yeah. Nice. All right. So I just usually start out by having people introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about background and kind of how your grief journey started and how it got you where you are.
Yeah. Isn't it funny when you think about yourself as a griever, like which identity stories do you put forward?
Exactly.
Like, so I always find this question really interesting and challenging and answer it a little bit differently. I think I have a long history of professional and personal grief, and it was the combination of those two that really launched me in 2019 to focusing exclusively on grief. But because I was a social worker and I worked in foster care and adoption and family services and crisis intervention, of course, in a way, I was working with people who were grieving, because when you work with humans, you're working with grievers. But really, it wasn't until the wake-up call I had at 40 years old after a year of my husband becoming unrecognizable and going from doctors to doctors and getting no answers that my previously healthy 44-year-old husband died in my arms, and leaving me a widow at the age of 40 and a parent to our child, only parent to our child who was 7 at the time. And when I was called back to work within 2 weeks to be the clinical director, because of our systems of care, even by amazing human beings who were also social workers, right, running the organization, I started to see the absolute lack of grief education, grief literacy in our culture, and not just in our culture, even more, maybe shockingly, was even in the social work or helping professions, right? We were really getting it wrong. And so fast forward a few more years, I founded a nonprofit working with cancer patients. So of course, also working with people experiencing loss, and then was at the bedside of my friend Joe when he died in his 40s as well, and went back to work. And the culmination of witnessing and experiencing though I had many loving people in my life, but the grief illiteracy and the grief harm that was caused to me, and the way in which my clients over the years, and clients in general, just patients in general, were being pathologized for their grief, that all sort of culminated at a pivotal time after a previous health scare, not the recent one, where I just thought, I can't have had all this professional and personal experience with grief. I was also had been a therapist. I trained in narrative therapy. So I was a storyteller and a speaker. I had all these all
the experience. Yeah.
Like all the experience in all these ways. And I really had a kind of really revelatory moment where I was like, I have to do something with this. And that's 2019 when I, much to the chagrin of most people in my life, quit my job and said, I'm creating a company focusing all about grief. It started with the line of empathy cards and the podcast. And this was pre-pandemic. So people were really like, who's going to want to talk
Right.
grief?
Yeah. Oh,
And here we are,
here
2025,
you
and
are.
so
So
much has happened.
Reimagining Grief, that's the name of your company that you
Yes.
started?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so tell me about the name. How do you kind of, I guess, explain it's your life's work kind of now,
Yes. Yes.
reimagining how people feel about grief. So what kind of
Yeah.
made you say this is what I want to do with my life? Just
Yeah. Well,
running
again,
into the inexperience of people?
I think it was the inexperience of people. It was the lack of resources that were out there, even from something simple as when my friends, you know, mother was accidentally
Mhm.
killed and another friend lost a child. And I would go to the stores and it was just these horrible platitudes that were really,
Yeah.
all the things. I mean, when I was in the hospital taking my 44-year-old husband off of life support, a friend of his walked up to me and said, "Don't worry, he'll be in a better place soon."
Ah,
Right?
ah,
And then those are
yeah.
the cards that you see. It all happens for a reason and all so I think it was that sort of culmination, and I really understood that the language we use to talk about things, and this comes from my narrative therapy training, not to nerd out, really impacts how we see the world.
Yeah.
And so I think I wanted us to understand that we really have to reimagine grief. I think culturally at this time in our lives, in this time in our modern era, we think about grief as a singular solo activity, which it absolutely
Mhm.
is not. We think about it as being, you know, something that happens to other people. So we put like this pathology on it when 100, my favorite party opening line, 100% of us will die, you know,
Yeah.
let's talk about grief. Um, and so I really understood that I wanted us to reimagine it as something that we do collectively, reimagine it as something that we give language to that has a lot of, I'm going to say this word, it's going to be odd to some people. There's a lot of beauty. There's a
Mhm.
lot of community. There's belonging. And actually, so much of the suffering that we experience in grief, in my opinion, is because of our grief illiteracy. So to reimagine grief is to reduce the unnecessary suffering. Grief is hard, it's painful, there's no way around it. But I personally think and have experienced that it's unnecessarily hard, unnecessarily difficult because of the isolation, because of the platitudes,
Yep.
because of the myths that we all carry. So I really wanted us to reimagine um, a new way to be with each other in our grief. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that so much because I kind of started for the same reason where it's I after I lost my daughter, I don't know if you know my story, but I
Yeah.
lost my dad, my stepmom, my
Yeah.
mom, and my daughter in a span of 18 months. And when I was looking for resources, I couldn't find really anything that I wanted. For me, it was I was looking for secular resources and I
Yes,
really
exactly.
struggled finding secular resources about grief. So that was kind of how I
Yes.
got started kind of the push to help people in that sort of manner. But yeah, no, I really appreciate that because it is one of those things that you always say I
Yeah.
can't imagine what I do. I don't know what I do
Which
if I lost a child or a
I
husband.
don't know about you, but I absolutely hate that phrase because the truth is you can imagine.
Yeah,
You
you
can
don't want
imagine it.
to. Yeah.
You don't want to, but you can imagine, and I'm asking you to imagine because this is my experience. And
Mhm.
expressions, sorry, this is again on my soapbox, but
No.
expressions like I don't know how you do it, or you're so strong, or I can't imagine. Again, I want to not sound like an angry person. I understand it comes from generally a good place, or at
Right.
least an unexamined place, is what I think about. But those kind of sayings further other people.
Mhm.
It further exacerbates the deep isolation you feel as a griever. So when you say, I can't imagine, or, like it's like you're creating an even taller wall between you and the griever, and you're doing the opposite thing you think you're doing
Yes.
by showing up for support. Okay, sorry. I'll get
No,
down off my soapbox
please do
now.
not apologize. I could rant about that forever. I've got a bunch of videos on that
Yeah.
because people
Okay.
say that to me all the time, like, "Oh, you're
Yeah.
doing so well. You're so
Yeah.
strong. How do you do it?" And I'm like, one, you have no idea
Yeah.
what it's like when I'm not on a podcast or in front of a
Yes.
camera recording
Yes.
videos.
Yeah.
And two, that it doesn't make me feel better, because then it almost makes you feel like you're doing something wrong.
Yes,
Because they're
right.
like,
Or that I
can
have
never
to
do
be
that.
this all the way, or that it's
Exactly.
performative, and there's so much
Yeah,
that's performative about it that's harmful. Yeah,
exactly. You have no idea what it's like or how you're going to react until it actually
yeah,
happens to you. Yeah.
yeah,
And then once you
exactly.
get there, you feel like no one actually understands
Exactly.
either. But
Yeah,
that's why I love your book for the way that it really tries to hit home that there's no one way.
yeah,
It's not the linear stages that we always grew up learning about,
yeah,
and it bounces all over the place and everyone's reaction is different.
yeah,
And like, you hesitated to, you think it's weird to use the word beauty, but there is beauty in the fact that no one really reacts the same way. Like,
yeah,
your response is an original response, and that is beautiful, that there's not a prescriptive
yeah.
way to grieve.
Grieving, I've been talking about this lately. I'm working on a retreat that's for grievers around creativity and grief. And one of the phrases that just keeps coming up to me, to your point there, which is like that grief is a creative act, because life is a creative act. And I
Yeah.
think one of the things that grief or profound loss breaks open is the myth that we all walk around with, that life is linear, predictable, and that frankly, we have control. We have
No.
control over nothing. Well, we have control over
Exactly.
the way we respond. That's it.
Mhm.
That's what we have. And so I think that's when I think about that. That's what I've been thinking about lately, is just this sort of the creativity, which means we've never been here before. We've never done this
Mhm.
before. So we have to give ourselves so much deep grace and compassion to find our way. And yes, each person's grief journey is unique. And there are a lot of common experiences that we have. And for the, I mean, it sounds like faced this when you had that cascading series
Right.
of losses, and I did too. Just even just the fact that we might know, oh, other people feel physically sick often, other people have grief brain, other people expect their person to walk through the door, other people get angry at happy looking people.
Right.
I remember that one, right? It's okay to laugh out loud, even though that doesn't mean you're dishonoring your person. Like,
Exactly.
all of that is really important too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just back to how you were saying,
Yeah.
like, life is unpredictable and you have no
Yeah.
idea, so you can't control it. I feel like your journey with breast cancer really illustrates that that idea, right? So
Yeah.
could you kind of talk about that
Yeah.
powerful part of your story, and I'm curious how that impacted you as a grief activist, already
Yeah.
going through, and knowing everything that you did about grief. What was that journey like for you?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Sit back, kids, and let me tell you a story. No, I'm just kidding.
We got
Um,
time, go for it.
yeah. Well, and I think because there's a couple of really profound things that happen. I don't know if I can swear on the
Yes,
live
you may
stream
go.
today, but
We're all about swearing here.
the breast cancer diagnosis and journey was what I like to call AFGOS, which I mention in the book, which stands for
Yeah,
another fucking growth opportunity,
yeah,
which is really a cheeky way to say, like, when the things happen to you, right, that you didn't ask for, it didn't want, at some point along the way, not in the beginning, you have the invitation to think about, like, what is there to be learned here.
yeah.
It's not a toxic positivity. It's not everything happens for a reason. None of that BS, but it's that. And my breast cancer diagnosis was an AFGO big time.
Yeah, I bet.
So as I alluded to earlier, for those of you who don't know my story, my husband was misdiagnosed for more than a year, becoming just a completely different and frankly terrifying person, because it turned out to be a grapefruit-sized brain tumor. And so I already had a history with the medical system not being particularly pleasant. And he died 2.5 weeks between the diagnosis and him dying in my arms. So it was a
Yeah.
whirlwind. And long story short, I found a lump on my breast 13 months before they finally did a biopsy. And I
Mm.
saw 6 doctors. I had mammograms, ultrasounds, appointments, etc. Everybody kept telling me it was a twisted milk duct, no big deal, sort of gaslighting me, basically.
Yeah.
And so when I finally came, somehow by the miracle of who knows what, um, I ended up finally, after literally insisting one doctor after the other do a biopsy, finding out that it was indeed triple positive breast cancer. So the compounding devastation of the trauma, and the reliving and unearthing the sort of closed off rage I had from more than a decade ago when my husband's
Yeah.
cancer was misdiagnosed, that sort of unearthed something. And the timing was so interesting. It was about 10 days before my book manuscript was due to my publisher, and
Wow.
about a month before I was scheduled to take the TEDx stage.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so it was like, what in that, so like all these professional dreams were coming
Right.
true to this culmination, right? And then kablamo. And it was
Yeah.
just after I got a family member stabilized who had been in a really serious crisis. So, we don't have control, right? Like that's the life.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think the thing I will say about what this grief, what the cancer journey has done, and I am, knock on wood, completed with treatment. I still take drugs, which I'll have to do for 4 more years, is I'm recognizing how, being a cancer survivor is laden with so much grief too. But I think the thing that was really clear to me, and the thing that I learned more about grief in
Mhm.
this era, sort of in this passage with my grief journey, came because of my book, to be honest. The last chapter I had to write between those 10 days, between diagnosis and the book being turned in, was a chapter I had on why it's important to let people help you in grief.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, universe, got ya.
Yeah.
Very funny, very
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah.
And so I really set out and I had just moved to California, really didn't know anybody here. So I really set out right in the beginning to ask for and receive all offers of help, which sounds like,
Mhm.
duh, Lisa, of course. But I think for most of us listening, whether you're a professional helper or not, we're really good at helping other people and we're really bad at letting other people help us.
100%.
Yeah. And so I really set out to do that, to let people help me. And the moral beauty of others was so profound and
Mhm.
offered me. And that's where I talk about beauty and wonder and awe. And so I think what I learned this time around was I needed to really lean in. I sort of needed to channel Rilke, right? I needed to let it all happen, the terror and the beauty. So I really committed to being pissed and sad and despondent and the grief of Eric and having to navigate cancer as a widow alone, living
Right.
alone. I let that all happen, but I also used a lot of the skills I talked about in the book. I literally was like, okay, I guess I'm writing this book. I get to
Yes, I should do this.
practice what I preach. I put myself in the way of beauty. I went to the ocean before each of my 12 chemotherapy sessions
Mm.
to meditate and take in beauty. I meditated. I let people help me. I went for beauty walks. I worked hard to savor the sweet delights of small little things, like the one day in a month where I had taste buds again and I could enjoy the taste of
Yeah.
something sweet, right? Or whatever it was. And so I think being present to it all, when I could,
Yeah.
was, I think, really important. It was really important for me and I think I worked through some old grief in ways that I hadn't, even though I've been through trauma therapy and
Yeah.
EMDR and, all the things that I've done and all the things that I know as a provider, as a practitioner too. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna throw up a comment here
Yeah.
from one of our viewers. This is Carissa, who I know she's a friend of mine. She says, I feel this so much. I was also misdiagnosed and had breast cancer for at least a year before they finally did a biopsy. I lost so much faith in the medical system and felt the total loss of control. Trauma
Yes.
and grief are two words that I think were explained to me in a way that would have really helped my healing. Yeah,
Yeah.
Carissa,
Thank you, Carissa. Yeah, absolutely. And the complexity, grief, a loss event, whatever it is, whether it's a diagnosis like we both experienced or a death of family members, it happens to us.
yeah,
And part of what is so profoundly challenging for us is it shows us how deeply we are out of control and that
yeah,
we don't have agency over situations. And neurobiologically, especially in that traumatic lens that Carissa was talking about, that's so problematic for our body. And the rage and just the out of controlness. I mean, I have to be honest, I still have so much problem with the medical system, and every appointment and everything is, I mean, I'm working through it, but it's problematic. But one of the things I did, I don't know if Carissa did or if you found this, is I really work, and I work with, when I work with one-on-one clients, individual grief support clients, I do this too, but I really work proactively, but also when I'm feeling the sort of trauma symptoms or when I'm feeling the overwhelm, to like, what do I have agency over today? Like, I really bring real sweet, close up attention to, it could be my response versus reacting. It could be taking some time to take a deep meditation, to call a friend, to take an extra long hot shower. I was a bath person. I'm not. So to take an extra long shower or to enjoy my morning cup of coffee for a little longer.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to, part of our grieving and our moving forward with our grief, which is what we do, not move on from it. And even part of our trauma healing, although I think at the level of trauma, we need a professional support too, is to find our way back to some sense of agency, some sense of way that we can soothe ourselves, that we can attend to ourselves, that we can, right a wrong in a way. And I'm still doing that to this day because I still feel the lingering effects of my cancer treatment for sure. And then, which then reminds me of the misdiagnosis and then my husband's and so on. Yeah.
Right. Well, I like how it's kind of a juxtaposition. So I don't like some of the things when people hear things like, going on your morning meditations and looking at the ocean or whatever, like some people automatically are like, oh, that's so positive, whatever.
Yes.
But you also, like, we both of us, I know, also embrace the suckiness of it. Like, it is all about feeling whatever those feelings are, but also not being afraid to embrace the positivity that comes along with it.
Yes. I work on that so much. And thank you. I mean, I literally created a line of empathy cards because I was so outraged by the toxic positivity and the BS. So I do know whenever I talk about, I just gave a talk at Endwell recently called Centering Aliveness in a World Full of Loss. And it was really about carrying the both and. That how critical it is that things like awe and wonder and beauty, or I say we have to allow delight. If we don't allow delight to dazzle our senses, if amazement doesn't make us breathless from time to time, then we lose twice.
Oh, I love that.
And I think one of the things that's really important to remember when you hear somebody talking about mindfulness or meditation or enjoying the flowers outside your window is we have this negativity bias built into us neurobiologically that keeps us safe. So we are really good and have really strong muscles at noticing everything that's going wrong and everything that could go wrong and all that's bad. So, which is in some ways good, but was more useful when we were being chased by the saber-toothed tiger across the savannah. Right now, we treat angry emails from our boss as in that sort of threat way. And so when I talk about this, it's like we have to work on building the musculature of these other things, not as a way to erase our pain, not as a way to dismiss the grief that we have, but actually I call it, it's like a balm to the weight of our grief, or it helps us carry our grief and buoy us up in our grief. It's not an either or, it's a both and. You hear me a lot. And in the book, I talk a lot about sort of the both and, yes, and improv kind of language. And I think that's a really important. So yes, if you're listening and you're like, oh my God, she's like doing that beauty walk meditation thing. Yes, but that's also because I allow myself to cry and rage and write and, wrestle and sleep. And so I need both of those things. And that's how you move forward with your person. If it's a death loss, which of course we grieve non-death losses, that's how you begin to, rewrite the manuscript of your life, as I say. And it has to include both. Otherwise, what's the point?
It does. And it's hard. We have Jen here commented, I'm finding that embracing the positivity is just as scary as the hurt. This past my first year date of losing my son. Jen, I'm so sorry. I've been through it. I understand. But yes, it is absolutely scary. I know for myself, and I don't know if you experienced this, Lisa, where you were talking about with laughing. Like I've had experiences where I was smiling or laughing in public and I felt so good. And it was like, oh my gosh, I'm a horrible person.
Yes. Yeah.
But I'm laughing after my daughter died. but it's learning to embrace the positivity along
Yes.
with the suckage. Yeah.
Yes. Jen, first of all, I'm seeing you and I'm holding you in my heart over your son, and you are not alone in feeling scared at this threshold that you're crossing in a way of like where like the daily delights of life or humor come your way. And so just to have an invitation to have a real grace that it's just a sign of your humanity and your will to live, and actually the way that you can carry your son forward. Like you too, Brooke, I definitely, the first time I laughed out loud, I immediately broke into tears and felt
Oh my gosh.
completely guilty
I
and was
know.
so devastated. And so I absolutely understand that. It's just a new threshold. It's just a sign that you are here, you are present. And actually, the reason those thresholds like that, I think, can be scary, and I don't know if you experience this, Brooke, too, is in the beginning of our loss and our grief, our deep, wretched anger and sorrow and anguish and longing is our relationship with our person.
Yes.
And part of what happens when we're grieving and moving forward is we're metabolizing and we're carrying forward and developing a new relationship with our person, one that allows them to live in our laughter, in our delights, in the service, acts of service but when we're moving through that transition, it's hard because it feels in a way like I'm letting them go by turning towards laughter, or I don't know what my relationship is with my person. And so just to have a lot of grace and to hear me, I hope you can hear me, Jen, that laughter or that presence to life is actually just another step in how you're evolving your relationship with your son. And it's not an either or. We don't have to turn towards our future or be looking towards our past. We can carry our person with us, even in our laughter and in our joy.
Oh, I
Yeah.
love that. That's going to
Yeah.
speak to so many people. I think
Yeah.
it's a
Thank you.
universal. I saw you had your book there. Were you going to
Yeah.
read something
Well,
from
one thing that I thought that might be helpful, just because you were talking about sort of the both and also the kind of the both and of feeling sort of the hard feelings and the joy, but also I think feeling maybe feeling guilty about like, how can I allow myself to be delighted and how can I find myself to be amazing? And years ago, I wrote a poem. And I think it's especially appropriate because the poem is called, since we're here on Morning Coffee, it's called Stop By for a Cup of Coffee.
Oh, I love it. All right.
I thought I would read it. It seemed really appropriate.
Yes.
But it is about this invitation to allow it all in, it all in. So stop by for a cup of coffee. While you were busy, your emotions stopped by for a cup of coffee. Just visitors seeking a warm and inviting respite. These travelers arrived with tales and insights at your door. Journeyers wishing to pass along the wisdom they discovered about the path already taken and the terrain that lies ahead. While you were busy, your emotions stopped by for a cup of coffee. Fear knocked nervously, first tapping, then banging. Sadness meandered slowly up your front walk. Anger arrived unannounced and rang the doorbell repeatedly, and confusion zigged and zagged until it stumbled upon your porch. While you were busy, your emotions stopped by for a cup of coffee. Joy's radiant light was dimmed by your drawn curtains. Amazement's gifts of wonder were left unopened on your front porch. Delight's bright smile went unseen through your closed door, and gratitude's comfort faded to unease, waiting to be let in. While you were busy, your emotions stopped by for a cup of coffee. Those intrepid visitors are still waiting on your doorstep, simply wanting to feel the warmth of being seen and held by you. These wanderers are desperate to share the wisdom from their travels, and they won't be on their way until you invite them in for a cup of coffee.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. And I love that it's both. It's all of the emotions,
the both.
good, the bad, the ugly. And if you're early in your grief, if you're listening to this and it is raw and real,
you just hold on. You get to just be in the anger and the sorrow. Absolutely. I think I definitely, would not have written this in the first year after my husband's death. Absolutely not. Right.
Jen,
But
beautiful.
Thank you, Jen. I think it's really this reminder to all of us that we don't get to have our emotions a la carte. And for any of us who've lived through trauma or dissociation, I survived a very early trauma in my teens and
Mm.
have spent a lot of my life quite dissociated. I really have to work to be present in my body. But I think what happens is we think, if I stuff down the anger, if I ignore the sorrow, then I can just get on with living. That's sort of our cultural message too, by the way.
Right.
Just,
Exactly.
but you don't. It all needs to be moved. Emotions are information that needs to be seen and held and witnessed by us, and they will move and metabolize. But when we keep them locked outside our front door, they will be on our porch. And we
Right.
know this because even when it's years later and then we have these like zings and these outbursts, it's because that emotion didn't get to be seen. So that's just a poetic way, because I love all things metaphor, poetry, and swearing is kind of my combo there. I think that's really important. And yes, Brooke, to your point, if you're listening to this, watching this, and you're thinking, no, I am not ready to open the door to delight, that's okay.
Right.
Just file this away.
Exactly.
Just remember that we were talking about this and come back to it when you're ready. Yeah.
Hang in there. Yeah, that's what I say in my book too. It's like, even at the beginning of my book, I'm like, if you're early on, it's almost like a different set of rules.
But I think it can be helpful. I think it can be helpful to know it's there, even if you're not ready to apply it to yourself. Because I think that's one of the things I really wished I would have had earlier on was, nobody in my life had lost their husband. We were all in our 30s and 40s. It's just to know that there's a life to be had, or that there's a different set of feelings and experience. And just to know that there might be some practices or some tools, I think is so, even if it's just filed away in the recesses of your mind, I think it's really helpful.
You're so right. It's why my book is like, grief sucks, but your life doesn't have to. So it's like,
yes,
there's hope there. Just hang on. You'll get there eventually.
Exactly.
But it is possible. So Carissa says, I find the correlation between guilt after a loved one passes and trying to find happiness and move forward, and the survivor's guilt after a health diagnosis is so interesting. So many similar feelings.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I can imagine there's a lot, I know for sure, because I have a lot of friends in LA right now whose house didn't burn down, and they're having a lot of survivor's guilt. And
oh my gosh, yes.
Yes, I was navigating breast cancer with two other friends, one of whom's diagnosis has not taken the turn that mine has, And I think to feel that guilt is normal, it is appropriate. So I don't want to, discourage or dismiss the fact that it arrives for us. And I want to remind each of us that our own suffering doesn't alleviate the suffering of other people. Right. And so to be present to some gratitude for your own unsuffering or your own wellness or your own positive health diagnosis is the way that you can bring compassion out into the world and show up for either that particular person or just people in general, animals, however, the planet.
Yeah.
And so while guilt is only useful when, for the minute it happens, it's an invitation to say, is there something I could do differently?
Right.
Or if there's a new situation, could I do it differently next time? And if the answer is no, it's only useful that first time. And then I really encourage you to find a way to turn your gaze towards compassion, to turn your gaze towards service, to turn your gaze towards gratitude for your own well-being. Yeah.
Oh, could not say that better myself. And I think one of the things, because we talk about like looking at the positive and wondering how such horrible traumatic things can end up with any sort of positivity. And one of those things I think relates to a lot of the stuff we're talking about is just, I feel like your empathy goes through the roof.
Yes.
And I can call out like Carissa, who's been watching and commenting with us. Carissa, that's one of the things that I know, like from your breast cancer diagnosis and scare and going through all that, you can tell that your empathy is through the roof, and you get it because of how you reacted when I lost Libby. Carissa was there, she's always the first one there. And she's still checking on me, even though it is years later, and still sending those messages to say like, hey, how you doing? Like just for no reason at all. And I think that is one of the most beautiful positive things to come out of deep loss, is just your caring and your empathy for other people.
Yes.
I want to throw this up so I don't forget it. And it kind of
Yes.
goes along with what we're saying. So Christine, our mutual friend here says, so great to see you today. Any thoughts on processing what's going on in the country at this moment? How do we reach out to California with compassion?
Yeah.
I think I don't know if you're struggling, like I am struggling so much watching
Yeah.
everything that's going on. It's bringing up a lot for me as a griever. So first,
Yes.
I would say to people, if you are struggling, we want to have compassion.
Yeah.
And we want to help.
Yeah.
But also take care of your own mental
Yeah.
health.
Yeah.
I know that I have had to turn it off sometimes when I see families going back to their house and talking about all of their, things that they've lost and family memories. It just brings up a whole host of things with the people that I lost. So I've had to, kind of monitor how much I am making that information available. But yeah, the empathy and the compassion are.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Well, and they're really two different things when we think about it, right? Empathy can be, I think empathy is beautiful, but I think empathy can be problematic. That's why we can have fatigue before your exact, because empathy asks us to put ourselves in their shoes, but then there's no action, there's no movement towards help. And so we can really get drowned by it. And so compassion, I think, is the key word that Christine brought there. It's like, because compassion is to see and believe your experience of pain and suffering, and then to be moved towards action. So I do think I want to echo what you said, Brooke. Turn off the social media, turn off the media. Unless you're in the area and you're at risk of, and you need to know what's happening. I really do think it's not about, I'm pretending it's not happening. If you know it's happening and you find yourself mired and it's overwhelming your nervous system, I encourage you to turn it off, to do things to replenish your nervous system. And then back to where we were talking about earlier, the most important thing we can do when we feel overwhelmed with grief, with trauma, just with the hardness and the depravity of the world, is to be the light we want to see in the world. So to take action. So that might look like something, of course, like sending money or resources, if you can, to the California area, but it could also literally be bringing soup to your elderly neighbor. It could be offering to mow the lawn for the person next door who's disabled or who is having some challenge keeping care of their property. The act of service, the act of that movement of our heart pain towards the betterment of the world is actually the way we discharge it. We are not doing the people in California any good by continuing to watch the news feeds and feeling overwhelmed, because then we end up in a freeze state, right? And then we're actually not of service to them, but we're also maybe not of service to ourselves. We're not of service to our neighbors, wherever we are. So I think have the deep compassion, have the love and the care, but make sure you're metabolizing or moving it into some kind of action state. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. And I would add kind of what you're saying. It doesn't have to be on a grand scale. I don't know if you hear this as well, just being in the grief world and having the book and, being on social media and whatever. I have people say to me, like, but I'm not doing what you're doing. And it's like, you don't have to do what I'm doing. Like, I'm a teacher. This is what I do. This is just what I'm drawn to naturally, but you do not have to like start a charity or to have a YouTube channel. Just the simple things like you described, taking care of people in your community and people that you care about, just being a good person.
Yes.
Yeah.
Look, a more compassionate world, a more grief literate world, which is, really the mission that I'm on. Actually, yes, it's great that we have these platforms like yours and mine and so many of the people I admire. But really in the day-to-day, the way we are going to see, and I think we are seeing some forward movement, some change, is on the ground. It's the way you have in your phone the death anniversaries of all the people who your friends have lost, and you reach out to them on their death anniversary. It's the way that you don't say the platitudes to the people that you approach. It's the way you pause and ask the person to tell them a favorite quality of their person. It's one of my favorite things to do, right? This just happened the other day. So I just want to give this example. Woke up one morning, black sludge in my bathtub for no reason. Gross. Oh, no. Irrelevant, right? Nothing in the scheme of fires. Landlord, plumber came out, waited for the 4-hour window. Somehow he managed to come before the 4 hours was up, which is amazing. Figured out what the problem is. And as he was walking out the door, he saw the book cover sign. And he said, would it be, and he kind of chuckled and he said, would it be okay if I take a picture? And I said, yes, of course. And my book was sitting right here. I said, that's, my book. And he said, yeah, I think my wife really needs to see this. And so but in my mind, I was like, hurry up. And I've lost half of my day. You know what I mean? Like I was like in that,
Yeah.
like, how inconvenient for me. And when he
Right.
said that, I just paused and I thought, have you experienced a loss? I just like
Mhm.
took a deep breath. I slowed down in my body and I paused and I just said, have you experienced a loss recently? And he said, yeah, my 18-year-old son just
Oh,
died and I'm doing okay, but I don't think my wife is handling it very well. And I think she would really appreciate this.
yeah.
And I just said, and I just paused and I said, can you tell me the name of your person and what's your favorite quality? You told me about his son who's always wanted to make sure everybody else was happy and was just the most
Mm.
generous kid. And I repeated it back to him. And then he saw my book. I, signed it and gave him I said, just, why don't you take this home for your wife? She might like it. And by the way, you might, find it useful too. And he paused on his way out the door and he said, thank you. Nobody ever gives me a chance to talk about my son.
Oh, yeah.
So if you feel overwhelmed by the wars and the fires and the
Mm.
floods and the whatever you see in the world, and of course, donate, support if you can, but pick up the phone and share a
Mhm.
memory of like, like, oh, I just was thinking about your person and how they used to crack me up or how generous they were, or, that's how we change. That's
Yeah.
how we do good in the world. That's how we change the grief culture that we have in the world. Do not, one last railing is because I'm seeing this also a lot on social media, though I am also staying off it mostly, is there's a lot of people out there trying to do at least it's just stuff.
Mm.
It is
Yes.
never our job to tell an early griever who, by the way, is still like in the midst of the loss
Right.
itself. Like that loss event isn't even done yet for a lot of
Yeah.
these people. It is never appropriate to toxic positivity their way out of it. And I mean, even though
Mm.
we've been talking a lot, this is for further down the road. And it's
Yes.
not your job. It's actually for the griever themselves to find their way to that. So there's a lot of BS around here around like, it's just stuff and it's things. And if the griever, the person who lost themselves are saying that, that's fine. That's how, if they want to see that, that's
Right.
okay. But for us on the outside we have to be willing to see and meet other people in their pain and just hold it.
Yeah.
That's the best thing you can do for a griever. And the worst thing you can do to a griever is try to hurry them out of it by saying, it was just stuff. You should be
Mhm.
grateful that you're alive or that your family is alive. That is
Ugh.
the opposite of helping. So get comfortable with other people's discomfort and just hold that space
Yeah.
lovingly. That's
Yeah.
the best
I
gift you can give.
It's funny that you brought that up. I just have a super quick story here because that reminds me so much of something I literally just experienced this week. And I thought about it with people posting that on social media. And a lot of stuff, I moved, I had to sell the house where my
Yeah.
daughter and I lived. And my ex-husband, since I live in a tiny house, my ex-husband has a lot of Libby's stuff stored in the basement of his house. And he was going through it and I guess cleaning up his basement. And I drove by the other day, and out at the trash bin was the rug that was in Libby's room. And when I see those posts that say, like, it's
Yeah.
just stuff, this was an old rug that had been
Yeah.
sitting in a basement for 3 years
Yeah.
and, all stained and whatever. As soon as I saw that rug, I
Yeah.
freaking broke down because and if I wouldn't have seen the rug, I probably never would have thought about it again. But just
Yes.
seeing that rug, like all of those memories of my daughter laying on it and doing
Yes.
gymnastics and dance moves and snuggling with the dog on it, whatever, it was like,
Exactly.
it all took me right back there. So saying it's just stuff, like
Yeah.
yes, it
No,
just minimizes it.
our things hold our memories, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so and yes, moving forward, we work to carry our memories with us, but pictures, objects, they're a touchstone as a way to reach back into the memories. And our memories are important because they're part of how we continue to build and cultivate the story of our lives, which is very
Yeah.
much what we need to operate. And so, yeah, just don't say that to people. Don't say it's just stuff.
No,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
that
just
compassion,
keep
we wanna build up that compassion
the
and
musculature of compassion is so important. Empathy
it
can
is.
lead to a lot of fatigue. So really feel the feelings, be present to somebody's pain and sorrow, and then find a way to move it. And that often looks like acts of service. It can look like acts of caring for yourself and self-care.
Yeah.
It can also look like putting yourself in the way of beauty. When we see a lot of horror and tragedy in the world, whether it's man-made, planet-made, well, both in this case, right? I think it is really important to remind ourselves that there is also those acts of kindness by either seeing it, or the goodness in the world by either seeing it or being it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. We're like almost out of time, which just boggles my mind because I feel like we barely scratched the surface of the question.
I'll come back another day for a part two.
Oh my gosh, I would love it. I just want to go back to, I think, your idea of centering aliveness, just because I love that idea. So I'm wondering, just to kind of wrap up.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the big ideas that you have. Can you explain that to my audience? Because I just love it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. It's been something that's been evolving to me, and really, in a way, it's kind of what I didn't name it that at the time, but that's what I was practicing as a way to navigate surviving surgery and chemotherapy and radiation and immunotherapy and all the horror and the side effects from those things. And this was this talk that I gave at Endwell. So you're welcome to go check out that talk. And I completed it as an essay as well. But it's really about what we've been talking. I mean, it's really summarizing the theme today, that like there is this notion that like hard things are going to happen, right? 100% of us are going to die. 100% of the people that we love are going to die. And death also isn't always the only worst thing that's going to happen, right? People are going to get ill and injured and sick and so on and so forth. People are going to lose their homes. And so if we aren't careful, we can let it all take us down, right? We can be laid so low that we never get back up. And when I got the cancer diagnosis this year and made that commitment to be really intentional about being with all the feelings, what I recognized is that we have to work extraordinarily hard to build the musculature it takes to be delighted, to find amazement, right? To be in the place of beauty. Because again, otherwise we lose twice.
Yeah.
And so it's really about this exercise of intentionality. And it involves all kinds of things. I offer in my talk sort of 7 daily rituals that I use in my life to help us center aliveness. Again, it's not about ignoring the losses that we experience. It actually helps us hold and metabolize and walk alongside sorrow, which is really what we are doing. If we're not careful, we become sorrow. But really, this action of centering aliveness in a world full of loss helps us see ourselves as a companion to our sorrow, but also as a companion to our joy too. And that's sort of the direction. I mean, grief is a part of that. So I'm not talking about grief in my work going forward. But for me, where I'm at, from what I'm seeing in the world and with my clients, that's sort of the crux or the mission of where I'm headed in the work that I'm doing and how I'm speaking and talking in the world. Yeah.
So important. Okay. So what is one thing that you focus on that brings you joy?
Well, besides my little rescue pup, Frankie Joy, her middle name is Joy because she brings me joy. For me, my sort of daily access to joy is I take beauty walks. Sometimes they're an hour, sometimes they're 5 minutes, but I really do. I also live in Southern California, so it's easy to do a beauty walk, but I really do. I did this when I lived in Michigan and when I lived in the 110 degree summer days in Austin, when I lived in Austin for 8 years. First of all, there's the movement in your body that actually helps release a lot of stagnant emotion and energy. But again, it's just that mindfulness switch of you're ruminating, feeling bad, suffering, right, in your mind, because it's a loop. And the movement of walking and the intentionality of looking for something beautiful. It could be a leaf that's fallen to the ground. It could be a rose that's blooming. It could be the sweet statue in your neighbor's yard. It could be the way the clouds are fluffy in the sky. That's what I do on a daily basis. Sometimes, like I said, it's like literally 5 o'clock and I've been at my computer all day and I'm like, dang it, I got to go out and do that thing.
Yeah.
But to do it, don't underestimate, I think people think I have to have an hour, and this isn't even about exercise. This is
Right.
just about, you can do it in your house. When I was in the depths of my cancer, especially the 12 weeks of chemo, when I really couldn't, leave the house, I made sure I had a beautiful bouquet of flowers in front of me to stare at.
Yeah. Well, I
Look,
love that because it's so simple and
it doesn't cost money.
it's free. It's
Yeah,
easy.
and it doesn't require mobility. So I want to just name, if I'm listening to people who don't have mobility for whatever reason in their lives right now, or energy, for whatever reason, sit yourself somewhere in your house where there's some painting, where there's some book, where there's some picture frame, where there's some flower, where there's some seashells, whatever is in front of you. And just allow yourself to be present to the beauty of whatever that thing is.
Yeah.
And is it going to erase the pain of your grief? No, but is it going to buoy you and be a balm to the weight of your grief? Yes, absolutely.
It is. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Mine's helping other people. I give scholarships for dancers who are in financial need because my daughter was a competitive dancer. Every time I get to write a check or deliver a check or see a picture, of someone holding up that scholarship, that's actually one thing that I absolutely
love that. And we know that too, by the way, not to nerd out, but there's science in that. Like, we feel better when we are of service to other people. I will say, actually, because it's Sunday, we're chatting on a Sunday. For about a year and a half, 2 years since I moved to California, every Sunday I go to my local farmer's market and I buy myself flowers, and I always buy an extra bouquet of flowers, and I give a bouquet of flowers to a random stranger every week. I've been doing it for almost 2 years now.
That's amazing.
And let me just tell you, other people, of course, are very gracious and they're surprised. And I always pick a different kind of constellation, a mother and daughter, or a guy and his older guy and his wife, like whoever. Yes, they're happy and it's joyful, and you should see the smiles on people's faces. But me, it's $8. This bouquet of flowers is $8, which is a privilege to have to give away, but it's $8. That buoys me for the whole, I can't wait for Sundays.
Yep.
Like, literally after this, I'm meeting my daughter at the farmer's market and we're going to do that. I can't wait for Sundays. So if you don't have something to look forward to, or if you're having a hard time thinking about how do you put yourself in the way of joy or delight or just the moral beauty of others, be that in the world in whatever way, by the way. It could be shoveling somebody's sidewalk. It doesn't have to be buying them something, but it could be donating to dancers. It could be buying a random bouquet of flowers for random strangers.
Oh, yes. All right. I think that's a great place. Like I said, I feel like we could talk forever, but that's a great place to kind of wrap it up. I just want to throw up here. Carissa says, beautiful ladies, you are helping so many people. Right back at you, Carissa. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. If you're watching in the replay, feel free to leave comments and questions, and I will get back to those as soon as I can. Yeah. Lisa, thank you so much. That was just a pure joy and honor having you on the show. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you or buy your book?
That's amazing. Yeah. I think the best thing to do, because I am switching maybe a little off social media as we were talking about, come to my website. It's just lisakeefauver.com. And you can find out about my one-on-one work, my retreats, my book, Grief is a Sneaky Bitch, my podcast, Grief is a Sneaky Bitch, all the work that I do. Sign up for my newsletter there. And I would love to be of service to any griever who's watching or listening.
All right. All right. Again, sending love to everyone in California affected by the fires. We are thinking of you. Go out and do something nice for someone today.
Yes.
do it in our honor. Hopefully we inspired you to do some service for others today. And I will see you next show. Bye, everyone.